Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Tuesday, May 6, 2025 at 3:20 in the afternoon. And so we're back from a short break, and now we will continue our discussions on H-137. It will be on notice tomorrow and up for action on Thursday. So I think where we left it, Aaron, I think you'd like to fill us in on the department is.
Sure. Good afternoon, Aaron Ferentz, Deputy Commissioner for Banking with Department of Financial Regulation. So as you've already heard, we did work with the CoinFlip folks, Larry and his team, to work on these amendments, and we've gotten to a spot where we feel comfortable we could regulate these in conjunction with continuing with the moratorium. So just that sort of a taking our time. Let's see how they work. Let's work through how the marketplace responds to these. Is the approach that we're taking.
How relevant is the blockchain when they
Analytics
that you propose?
I think it's very helpful for just identifying who bad actors would be. That way you can identify if coins are going to, or Bitcoins or virtual currencies are going to a known wallet address that's been involved in that before. You could identify that and stop the transaction beforehand. You could look forward to see if there are any additional transactions going there. From our perspective, it's not necessarily that important, but I think it's important to CoinFlip in terms of protecting where they would be on the hook for any fraud. So they want to make sure that they're not sending it to a known fraudulent wallet address. So.
Aaron, so I sit around. There's an FBI IC3 report from 2024, and it's showing the crypto. So the ATM and kiosks, it's showing like over 60 is like by far the biggest amount of like fraud that's happening with the kiosks.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, like, if the number of reports to the AG is low, but we also know, just like anecdotally from news articles, that when elderly experience like romance scams, they're too embarrassed to like say something and report it. So I'm just curious, like, how is the state of Vermont going to make sure that we're not going to open up the elderly to these fraud scams and then not know about it, I guess? Like, how are we going to keep tabs on that?
Yeah, I mean that's a challenge we face every day. Like I can't investigate fraud if someone doesn't report it to me. So I mean, I just as the department, should this pass as written, we will try and work through any messaging we need to over the summer to really push out the message of, if you are a victim of a scam, report it immediately so that we can help you out. That's sort of a situation. I mean, there will only be 2 kiosk machines. Mm-hmm. There was testimony about the actual level of activity that I provided in the fourth quarter of last year. There was $142,000 transacted through the legal Vermont kiosks. That was about 225 transactions. So most of them are actually on the smaller side.
Sorry to be late. You had I had the opportunity to read your report, your January report.
Okay.
A lot of good stuff in it. A lot of stuff that gives me a lot of pause.
Okay.
I'm wondering if that was January, this is now. Any observations that were in the report that you want to add to or change, or can we use that report as sort of our factual snapshot of what's going on?
Yeah, I think you can definitely use that report as the factual snapshot of going on. There's been, she just referenced that FBI report. There are other things in the press going on in other states. I think the lesson to learn is that with less activity, we're having less fraud.
Another question. In terms of how you would regulate, or how you do regulate, I suppose, kiosk operators. And I'm thinking of a few different functions, you know, you might want to do a periodic examination.
Hmm.
You might, you know, if something flags, either complaints or whatever, you might want to do an investigation.
Mhm.
How do you, who pays for the costs of the examinations and the investigations? Do you have a general bill? I remember some provisions that allowed the department to examine and investigate and charge back.
Sure.
Are those
Yeah, so-
in place for these folks?
Yes, primarily. So when we conduct examinations, we charge the institution being examined for our time, for examiner time. So we bill them for that. With an investigation, our primary focus would be remediating the situation. So someone says, I was scammed. How can we get that resolved for the customer, or get an answer for, you know, why this situation occurred? So we're not necessarily worried about the remediation there, but we do charge for the exams, I guess.
For the investigation, if it got more complex, administrative or whatever litigation, would you have the ability to charge back on that?
We would probably then change that investigation into more of an exam, and yes, we would be able to do that.
Thank you. So, Andrew, you know, I'm looking through some of the changes that have been sort of brought forward, and a lot of the disclosures for the new accounts, and then information that's on receipts, customer warnings. It feels like this language exists because it influences people's behavior, or it raises their awareness of something. And if something is to happen, or something raises some suspicion, or they're operating in a more worldwise manner. Have you seen in other aspects of your jurisdiction that language and other kinds of information sharing affects consumer behavior in ways that leads to a reduction in fraudulent activity, or being gullibility, or making mistakes, or things of that nature?
I mean, I think more information and knowledge about how scams can occur, and how scammers could get someone to, you know, let go of their funds is definitely helpful in general. A lot of the language in this bill in terms of disclosures to customers when they're new, when they're doing a transaction, is also based on what other states have enacted, which I do think helps. Has it eliminated the problem? No.
But there isn't some watershed moment with some other thing in the realm of like Vermont's commercial activities or financial activities, where there was an issue, and then some intervention like this took place, and we saw some salubrious effect.
I don't know that I could point to anything like what you're describing.
Okay.
So looking at a lot of changes that make it safer, if we can use that term, for consumers, perhaps. They're trying to make it maybe safer. Also looking at changing the transaction fee to 15% to make it more, I don't know. It's much more, it's better for the kiosks, right? I mean, we're looking at what, $600 or $300. We changed the
daily transaction limit to 2,000, exactly.
yeah. So, what kind of concerns do you have around that? I have a lot of them, and you're the one who's actually.
Yeah, I mean, I in the report, we did highlight that one of the, I forgot who in their comments wrote that, that should change, because we are asking a lot of them in terms of a lot of the consumer protections we didn't act. So you can't, in their testimony, you couldn't run the business at a 3% fee cap. I mean, if you look at it in terms of a loan or an APR, I know there was a question earlier, like that would be an astronomical APR, but it's really, it's not necessarily a credit transaction. So it's kind of an apple to an orange situation comparison. I mean, we're indifferent to that. That was the language that that we proposed originally last session. That was reduced. So we sort of, we're taking a no no position on that, I guess you could say.
I guess it's interesting to me because earlier this year, we had the Secretary of State's office in here talking about the fees that they charge, and they said they're different across the board, but we're doing the same work. And this is doing the same work for different amounts of money across the board, and that to me, I don't know, just
Yeah.
it doesn't sit exactly right with me, and just curious, but.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is a very high cost way of entering the crypto markets. That is a known fact. I mean, you know, you could download the Coinbase app right now and get online for much less.
So if I remember, the refund period has changed, if I remember. I know you had some sort of a recommendation, I think, now it's gone up to a new customer within 30 days. If there's something fraudulent that's occurred, they can get a refund if they go through a few hoops.
That's correct.
Anything magical about 30 days? I mean, I remember in your report that you observed that, you know, for the folks who are really victims of the scam, sometimes that can occur over a fairly long period of time.
Sure.
So just wondering what you think about the 30 days is, you know, or what would be the policy considerations that would go through your mind if you wanted to increase that, you know, that refund period?
Yeah, there's a couple different components. There's 30-day new customer definition. And then there's also the refund period, which is 90 days from the last fraudulent transaction. So that could be 6 months from now.
Yes, I understand, but, oh, yes, I agree, totally. But, you know, you got the 30 days and then you got the 90 days. If I recall from your report, some folks don't really wake up to what's
Right.
going on for a period of time after that.
Sure.
And so what are the policy considerations?
Well, from our perspective, we were looking at the refund provisions are pretty strong, the strongest that any other state has enacted. So we were really thinking that if folks were victimized, they would at least be able to get, or that new customer period would give them a full refund. And then after on, the existing customer period would at least be the fees. So in a weird way, the higher the fee, the more of a refund in that particular situation.
I get that. One other question. It's defined in terms of something that would be fraudulent activity. So do you see anything meaningful between, you know, saying has to be fraudulent activity as opposed to something like, you know, misrepresentation? I'm thinking of the knowledge, you know, criterion, and whether saying it has to be fraudulent is imposing, you know, maybe a little bit higher bar than simply, you know, material representation.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand the distinction between those two. I think there's a concern that, and we certainly wouldn't want folks to, you know, file a police report because the price of Bitcoin dropped in half and now they want the refund of the money that they put in that particular case. So it should be tied to some other event that got them to get involved in this when they really had no other intention to do so.
Yeah, I'm thinking misrepresentation where, you know, something factual gets put out there.
Sure.
And it's either true or false, right? But you don't have to show that the person involved in that scam actually knew. You don't have to go through the mental exercise of
Right.
intent.
Yeah, that would be an interesting scenario. I do know the bill does have language that allows the commissioner to enact rules over what constitutes fraudulent activity.
Okay.
So if we see situations occurring to that vein, we could probably enact some rules regarding that.
Questions for Aaron? Michael?
So we were told that there's about $150 million, no, $150,000 quarterly being put into these machines. Do you have any suspicion of where that's coming from? And
I don't have any suspicions of where it's coming from. I just wouldn't know. I'd have to look at that information. As part of our exam, we would have the ability to get that data, that information, who were the customers doing the transactions, when, how much, those types of details. But I don't know that information right now. That dollar amount was 225 transactions. So just doing the math, each transaction was less on average than $1,000.
right, and I get that. $1,000 is a lot of money for most Vermonters to pull out
Sure.
in cash. In fact, especially looking for Attleboro, where the median income is $49,000. Essex is a little bit, pricier. They have 96,000. I don't know where was the other kiosk? Oh, it's Burlington.
It's in Norwich.
Oh, that's Norwich.
Third was in Norwich.
Norwich. So,
That's one that went away, one in.
Norwich one closed. That's correct.
right. So, I mean, that's, yeah.
I'm curious about the moratorium. Do
Sure.
you have any concerns with it lifting and kind of the potential of like an influx of operators and?
I sort of do. Yeah. I mean, we did see a rush to market prior to the current moratorium being enacted. Lots of people actually put machines into stores without even getting permission from us. So we had to tell them, look, you didn't meet the deadline. You can't turn that machine on. So the moratorium began last July 1st.
And you said the rush to market was kind of like.
Right, from the passage of the bill explaining what the moratorium was.
How'd you catch wind of that?
How did we
How
catch?
did you catch wind of that? That there was a rush of.
We have examiners that like to go to Cumberland Farms, I guess, and they. They're like, hey, there's one over in Burlington, there's one in Winooski. Let's go look at that.
Questions? Okay, Aaron, thank you. Larry, were you able to get us some of the data that we talked about this morning?
Yes. Hello again. So we had 221 users for the last 12 months is how we did that. 100 of those were new users. We had 665 transactions. The average transaction size was $763. And just a reminder that the transaction limit is 1,000. So, that would skew a little lower than average because they're limited to 1,000. And for the last 12 months, it was $423,600 of transactions.
Now, through blockchain analytics that you have, were you able to, did you flag any issues on any of those transactions that happened?
No. So out of those transactions, there were none that were flagged to high-risk wallets. We did have a handful of customers who called into customer service, and customer service blocked those customers from transacting further based on, something that they told to us. So they were not scam victims, but they were, blocked from transacting any further by customer service. Then that's just part of a normal compliance program where people call in and you may ask them questions for more information. They don't provide it. So then you block them from transacting further. And, if you want, I was going to just give a kind of an overview of blockchain in general, just to help the committee understand how the blockchain analytics works and why I think that there is some confusion about criminals using crypto when it maybe isn't correct. So just sort of a quick summary. So, at its core, blockchain it's like a new ledger. So it's like an accounting books or public records that we already use, but it's digital, it's shared, and it can't be tampered with after the fact. And that's one of the important aspects of blockchain is that you cannot ever tamper with it. So I like to think of it like a highway with permanent surveillance cameras. You can drive wherever you want, but every move you make is on record. And to put a finer detail on it, so a blockchain is a shared database that records transactions in chronological order. Every transaction is timestamped and linked to the one before it. That's where you get the blockchain terminology from, because each transaction is linked, forming a chain. And once that data is added to the blockchain, it's immutable, meaning that nobody can ever change it. So unlike cash or even traditional banking, blockchain transactions are recorded permanently and publicly. So if someone tries to launder money or steal crypto, their actions are traceable by law enforcement because it's visible to everybody. So investigators, whether at our company or one of our competitors or law enforcement, they can see where the crypto is where it's being transferred from wallet to wallet, even if it goes across borders, because crypto is borderless. And law enforcement already does this to trace illicit funds, and that's why we often get subpoenas and SAR backup file requests. So, just an example, the Department of Justice used blockchain analytics to arrest ransomware groups. They seize stolen crypto and they disrupt illicit markets like the Silk Road by using blockchain analytics. In fact, about 2 years ago, Hamas told its followers, stop sending us Bitcoin because the US government can trace it back to you and you'll get caught for, funding terrorism. So this is more public than traditional finance and traditional banks, which is why law enforcement, while of course we don't want scams to happen, in terms of figuring out who are the criminals, it's all public on the blockchain. And criminals want something that's not visible and not public so they can deny that they've done it. So, criminals aren't going to be using blockchain systems because everything they do is visible to everybody else. And, the digital wallet, just to maybe put a little finer point on it, the digital wallet is, an app or a software that allows you to send, receive, and store digital assets on the blockchain. You can do it yourself through the blockchain, through a computer program, but it's very difficult for an everyday user to do that. So that's where the wallets come from. And each wallet has a public key, which is like your account number, and that's for receiving funds. And then there's a private key, which is like your PIN or your password for authorizing transactions. So, digital wallets are not anonymous. Every transaction is permanently recorded on the blockchain. And so it's a detailed, traceable trail for law enforcement to catch people who are doing things, improperly.
So you're saying it's very public, but we couldn't find out whether or not the money being put into folks' wallets are staying with them or going somewhere else, correct?
So we would have to do an analysis of every single customer transaction, and that would take a compliance analyst looking at the blockchain analytics. And I just don't have that information right now to give to you. And the point was that the fact that somebody is transferring crypto from the initial wallet to another wallet is not an indication of fraud. So that would not flag a compliance analyst to do that review. So that's why I don't have that information, because our customers oftentimes are transferring their crypto from wallet to wallet because people do that to keep their crypto safe. You don't want to have all of your crypto in one wallet in case, someone finds your 12 keywords written on your piece of paper, or you have it in your Google, your Gmail, and someone hacks your Gmail, then they can steal that crypto. So the compliance team is not automatically investigating when someone moves crypto to a different wallet, because that's not an indication of fraud. But what is traced is if a customer transfers crypto to a wallet that is a high risk wallet, a level 10 wallet, then that does trigger a compliance analyst to review that matter, because that's an indication that that customer has done something wrong, that they've either been defrauded themselves or that they're transferring crypto to a money launderer's wallet. And that was what triggers those investigations, and we would then submit a SAR if it was over that $2,000 threshold.
But I just want to be clear, the reason why I'm asking, because when we're talking about this, investing in crypto is you keeping the funds in your wallet. If we're talking about using it for, purchasing things or sending money somewhere, then that gets me to the other issue of what are you sending it to, for what reason, and is it going into another country? And that's where I get a little squishy on this. If it were $150,000 quarterly that were going into accounts that people were using for fun to, watch the market go up and down on crypto, that would be a different conversation for me. I would be like, yeah, you know what? That's okay. It's like, playing the slots machine. But I get a little, that's the reason why I would really like to have that information. It would make the world a difference for me.
Yeah, and but I get what you're saying, but this isn't an issue for crypto kiosks. That is a crypto issue in general. So your question, is that you're just a crypto skeptic, right? So we're not here talking about banning or whatever we do for crypto everywhere. We just heard from Aaron in the House or in the Senate, excuse me, that there's $80 million of crypto transactions happening last quarter. And that's mostly happening at exchanges where the same thing is happening. People buy crypto, they buy things with it, they transfer it to a different wallet, they transfer it to, a family member in a different state or a different country. That's the nature of crypto, is that you can't transfer it. That's one of the value propositions. And even myself, I have multiple wallets that I use for crypto because I don't want to have a large amount in one wallet because I worry what happens if someone hacks my Gmail and sees my 12-word key phrase. So it's very common to distribute your crypto into multiple wallets. So I'm just saying that what you're asking, I understand the question, but the things that you're saying are happening are not indications of fraud or nefarious activity. It is more of an issue of being paternalistic, right? You don't think that people should be buying crypto and sending it to somebody else.
Yes, that's correct.
But we're not going to solve that problem with this bill. That would have to be a wider bill that involved all of the money transmitters in the state, including the exchanges where there's a much more significant volume of transactions happening, where they're not going to be required to do these the 16 to 20 things that we've agreed to with the department and with the AARP. We've taken every single one of their suggestions or requirements and we said yes to it. And that's not because it's easy. It's not things that we want to do as an industry. So I've said yes to them because we want to work with the state to show that a kiosk operator can run a clean business, because we're the example of that. So we're willing to refund scam victims. If we're refunding scam victims and they're all scams, we'll go out of business immediately in the state. And I know there was a question about romance scam victims being too embarrassed to report that. And that is a problem. That's a problem for all finance, not just kiosks. But here we're solving that problem because we're requiring, these warnings and disclosures at the kiosks on the receipt. And one of them says the refund policy. So, it's hard for me to understand somebody who is informed that they can get a refund if they've been scammed and then is too embarrassed to ask for that refund. I understand when you may not think you're going to get a refund, you'd be too embarrassed. But here I think we're solving that. Plus, the romance scam victims are mostly elderly people. And we're required to call anyone 60 plus before their first transaction and ask them the purpose of their transaction and record that. So we'll be asking them, why are you using this kiosk? And if they say they've been sent here by somebody else or, to send to somebody else, that would be an improper use of the kiosk and we would block them from transacting. And we also have to call and have a recorded conversation with anybody who's buying more than $5,000 of crypto in I think it's I'm looking at my notes here, it's a 10-day period. So that's another, another touch point with people who are not just elderly. And, in Vermont, like every state, the banks have some responsibility to stop the romance scam victims because the cash is coming from a bank. And banks do, under federal law, ask people, why are you taking out this money? And if it's an elderly person who's taken out $50 a month for their last 10 years, they're all of a sudden taking out $5,000. The bank would stop that because that doesn't fit the transaction history of that individual.
Yeah, I don't think the bank is going to stop it. I think they will question it and have some strong suggestions, but in the end, they can't.
Yeah, there are some states that are passing laws to allow a bank to stop those transactions. And I'm not sure of the status of that in Vermont. And when I was saying stop, I meant by educating the individual. I didn't mean by not letting the person take the money out. So I apologize for being inartful in my word.
Okay. Oh, no,
That's what I meant.
I just want to be sure that.
Yeah.
we're accurate in what we're saying.
Yeah, of course, I apologize.
Is the 150,000 for 2 kiosks or is it the 3 kiosks? And is the 150,000 primarily from Essex or is it from Brattleboro? If it's just the 2, where?
Yeah, so
Is that-
I
You don't have that information.
yeah, I didn't ask for that. I apologize.
No, it's not your fault. I didn't ask for
Yeah.
this. I
Yeah.
should have, and that's on me. I,
And it would have been for all three because the last contract
Oh.
ended just a couple months ago. So it's a little bit looking back when we do those transaction reports to the department. So it would have been for all three of them. So, I just don't know if it was 50-ish thousand at each or if one had a higher amount.
Questions for
And maybe
Larry?
And maybe just a little bit of, anybody have questions with the 15% fee cap? I can try to explain sort of why it needs to be that level. Every state that has been working on this, other than Vermont, has passed either a fee disclosure or at least 15%, including California, Rhode Island, Connecticut. And it's because the most similar product in traditional finance is the currency exchange booth at the airport. And that's where the currency exchange booth has to buy the pesos from someone and then has to then sell the dollars once they get the dollars. And that's very expensive. So they're charging, 15-ish or more percent at the currency exchange booths, depending on what the currency is. So I know it seems like a lot, but there are some customers will pay a premium and here it'll be disclosed, right? So no customer will be making an uninformed decision because it's right on the kiosk. They'll see what the fee is. And if they don't want to transact, then they just, walk away.
What?
Hi, Larry. I'm just looking at the suit from Iowa, and it just brings to this question about the blockchain analytics. Is that actually going to be suitable enough to protect customers?
Yeah, so no one of these things will protect every consumer. It's about having a cadre of tools together, which will protect 99 point something percent of customers. But there will always be a game of cat and mouse with finance institutions and scammers where you make a change and then the scammers change how they act. And one of the things in this bill is requiring a in-house compliance team and an in-house chief compliance officer that doesn't own the company or doesn't own a significant amount of the company, less than 20%. And what that does is it then requires that person to comply with the Bank Secrecy Act, the Anti-Money Laundering, the Bank Secrecy Act, the Patriot Act, which, then there is some personal liability involved that chief compliance officer could face criminal liability if they're not following the rules. And other requirements are, enhanced due diligence policies, anti-fraud policies, consumer protection offer. So it's about having the right people at a company and making the right investments in consumer protection and compliance. And that's what this bill is doing, is requiring all of those things. And these are all things that we already do as a company. We're already refunding any customer who contacts us and says they've been scammed because we never want to profit off of scams. So that's why we never fight that. We were uncomfortable with refunding scam victims the full amount for their first couple of transactions because there is the possibility that it causes this moral hazard where people just disregard the scam warnings because they know they can get a refund. But I'm saying we have no evidence of that happening at our company. There's been a refund in place in Minnesota for a year and a half. I think Connecticut's been like a year and a half. And we have not seen a significant number of people requesting refunds. And I can't say that's the same for our competitors. I know that they've been complaining about it hurting their bottom line. But I think that all the tools that we have in place, which is being legislated here in this bill, this is the premier consumer protection bill for any financial institution, not just crypto, not just kiosks in the country. So we'll be preventing as much as is possible, but you'll never get to a zero scam amount.
Questions for Larry?
I just want to say thank you for, for coming in and giving as much information as you possibly can. I do appreciate that.
I appreciate all of your time. And look, I think we all share the same goal. My company does not want people to get scammed. Like, that's why we're fighting for legislation across the country to hopefully put those bad actors out of business because they're giving everyone in the industry, the whole crypto industry, in fact, a bad name. So, I think Vermont could do a really good thing here by having this consumer protection bill, which really with the refund, with a 30-day refund period for new users, and then having 90 days from the last transaction, that's really going to cover everything other than the most crazy, egregious scams, which would be caught by a company at some point with their anti-fraud, enhanced due diligence, compliance policies and procedures. So, I can't say this is going to save 100% of people, but I'm confident it's like 99 point something percent.
And just for clarity, I don't think anybody here thinks that you're intentionally trying to
Of
scam.
course. Yeah. Yeah, I know that.
The question? Okay, thank you, Larry.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So we've heard the amendments from Senate proposal of amendments on both pieces. We've gone through the language. We've heard from the Bankers Association. We've heard from Coin Flip, from Larry. We've heard from the department. Where do you all want to go?
So I'm really struggling with these three kiosks, $150,000. These communities, it's a real struggle for me to feel comfortable that it's all stuff that's being done that isn't hurting someone, whether or not it's, my initial thought, which would be, illegal activity, or whether it's scams on, being, done on our elderly in our community, which the state of Vermont has a very large amount of people that are older. Not you, Herb, you're eternally young. And I just, I was very hesitant to pass the bill out of here with the moratorium. And I was pretty clear on the record where I was standing on that, which would be, I would just ban them all outright. And that's still where I am.
The moratorium stays on for another year. There's significant protections. DFR is on board. We can revisit again next year to see what kind of data is flowed back. Yeah, it's like where everybody's at.
So I'm comfortable with the legislation as we went over it today morning and the more conversation this afternoon. It started to make me feel good that if the FR feels good about it, I can feel pretty good about it. The ratio of cryptocurrency fraud and amounts, and going through some of the math in Representative Priestley's document from the Internet Crime Complaint Center, suggests that our Vermont seniors are not shouldering an undue burden of the fraud complaints. So it seems that was a comforting data point for me. So I appreciate and would support the language as it's written.
I think I have some pretty serious concerns. I think just the concern about what it looks like if we lift the moratorium, how many more kiosks would be available. We heard from DFR that there was a rush when the bill was passed. I wonder if there's going to be another one and what kind of to sort of capacity to get that cleaned up and in line.
I think, we need to recognize that the moratorium comes off, that means that other companies that want to come into Vermont follow the same law that's in effect, that coin flip will be followed if this passes. So I don't know how many other kiosk operators that are out there actually utilize blockchain analytics. I would think it's probably not very many, whether or not they want to get into that realm or not. I think all that does is add to better protections for their clients. So, I think that there was a rush to get in here because they wanted to be on the ground floor before we shut the spigot off and created anything. And that wasn't allowed, thanks to the department. But anything we pass, anyone that wants to come in, and they have, number one, have to register and they have to follow the law. And so if we're comfortable, we feel comfortable with what's proposed here, then others that come in, I would think we would feel equally comfortable that they're following the law and protecting the customers if we feel that way. Sure.
So if we are, don't follow Mike's advice and have a ban, if we are going to have some statute, my sticking point is the refund period. I reviewed the report that Aaron put out there, and I remember, specifically, listening to the testimony, reading the testimony from the LA investigator about the number of folks, elderly folks, who had been victims, as a result of this, and the period of time it was certainly longer than 30 days. In a lot of, I can't remember the exact breakdown there. 30 days. I mean, I think, Larry and Aaron are absolutely right. I think in terms of comparing to other states, that's a pretty healthy refund period. But I'm just thinking in terms of the reality of someone who is, from the beginning, they're being scammed because they really don't understand what's going on. And is 30 days a sufficient period? And I'm not comfortable with the 30 days. How much more, you extend that, I'm really not sure. I'd like to kind of hear what other people think about that, I guess. But that's my sticking point. I would note that the 30 days, I mean, not to analogize it to a legal dispute, but statutes of limitations around fraud, I think at 2 or 3 years, because sometimes you don't really know what's going on. It's a contract situation or whatever. You don't know, that there was fraud for even if you're not vulnerable for a period of time. So that's my sticking point.
If I could just note that 30 days comes from the AARP. So that was the AARP suggestion, that 30-day period. The industry was at 7, DFR was at 14, and AARP won 30.
Yeah,
so that's where that came from.
I understand. I really appreciate that, Larry. It's a much longer period of time than I think anyone else has proposed. I'm trying to reconcile it with what I read. And when I'm thinking about, my mom when she was getting a little older and stuff, and how long it would take for her to figure out some things that she probably really shouldn't be doing. And it's long. And I know there's the 90 days, but that's to notify. The actual fraud has to occur within the 30-day period. And the notice relates back, I believe, to that. The 90-day notice period relates back to the 30-day new customer period, I think.
Would it make sense that would be a point that we would ask DFR to let us know about next year. That, you know, is that an issue? Are we seeing, you know, should it be longer? That type of thing. Just throwing things out that,
I mean, if they do have Aaron said they do have an examination authority that they could charge the industry, which is, I think is helped very good. And if they did an examination around that point, that would certainly be useful information.
I really, as I said, I like that it's better consumer protection. I think that's important. I think we're also incentivizing these companies to open in Vermont by increasing the fee amount. And so we're a little bit talking out of both sides of our mouth, and I don't love that. 3% to 15% is a big increase, and it's, so I can live with the rest of it as long as, we're in partnership with DFR, who is looking to ensure that we are continuing to protect the consumer. But that's my question is that 15% a lot?
I can also,
Yeah.
I guess when I look on business side of it, where I'm ensuring that I will pay back someone that's might have been defrauded, and trying to take into account how many times will this happen, amongst all the other pieces that are been added to the bill to make it strong. Is that amount seem to be right?
And one thing that Larry said, I think was meaningful for me, was that they really haven't seen a significant number of customers that are seeking refunds. So that tells me that in terms of the fee issue, I don't know what it tells me, that they're not going to need a higher fee in order to deal with refunds, or maybe not that absolute. Larry probably would not say that.
I was just about the fee issue. I also understand that the cost of dealing with cash is significant. But then I would say overall about the bill, I mean, if we end up deciding to go forward, I'm comfortable with it. DFR is comfortable with it. Sounds like it's been a collaborative process. I would want to see data next year, and definitely continue that having the moratorium for another year is important, so we can look at it again next year. But I do have concerns that this is a lot of work, a lot of big regulatory structure effort for something that doesn't seem to have great utility. It's almost like a solution looking for a problem, like cash to buy crypto. Just doesn't seems like it's, I just don't see it being a big benefit for Vermonters in general, with really significant downside of potential for fraud. So.
I'm assuming the Senate asked you to, I'm sorry, I'm looking over at you. I'm assuming Senate asked you to work with CoinFlip to draft legislation, correct? It's not, comfortable as being used. Is DFR really comfortable? And I'm sure that's an uncomfortable question to ask.
Sure. So we reached a spot where we could agree on the protection summary, is the best way to say that. If you wanted to go further, we wouldn't get in your way, but we are okay with this bill as written today.
Not to put words in your mouth, but it's sufficient to protect Vermonters.
Yes, I think so, or at least it gives us the tools to look at it and see where we end up in the end.
I mean, in general, I'm with Jonathan. I'm okay with the legislation. I think we need to, there are a couple of things that I'm pondering. One is, it's a business, and people can start businesses for, many different things. I may not think it's a great idea, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be allowed to build it or start it. The other thing is, I think the $1 million question here, the elephant in the room is, are we looking at a product or service that is a haven for massive, massive amounts of fraud? And if that is the case, then it should absolutely be made illegal. But the problem we have is we don't have any data on that. We have nothing, or very, very little. And I think it's unfair to go and say, oh, let's just make this illegal. Not that I'm saying anyone wants to do that. Okay. Michael, without having enough data to draw on that conclusion. Yes, we can sit here and say, well, I have a relative that fell victim to a romance scam and lost tens of thousands of dollars in it. I know I know this stuff goes on, but unless we have science, unless we have data to back our conclusions, I don't think it's fair that we make them. And I think that we're continuing the moratorium, will allow us to collect some additional data. My hope is that if we put this bill through the way it is, that in a year, we're going to have more data and we're going to be able to better make that conclusion. That's why we're keeping the moratorium. If in a year, DFR comes back to us and says, hey, this thing's just fraud all over the place, then we can say, all right, let's ban it. If not, then we can take a next step.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tony just expressed my thoughts really clearly. And part of the thing that I would like to see is, I mean, this is also notice to coin flip that we're going to want that blockchain data, showing, so where did those transactions go? How many of those transactions did turn into fraudulent or go to wallets that had been flagged as problems. So it gives a year to collect that data. We can be real clear that that's part of the data we want, and then we'll go from there.
Serious, can I ask a question about that? If the moratorium is extended, are we referring to
July 1 of 2026.
6? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo, I think, a lot of sentiments that have been said, and I appreciate the AARP and DFR were consulted in this, so I'd support this and would love to check back next year.
Yeah, my only question about the year, I guess, is are we gonna, and again, focusing my issue is sort of what are the ranges of time where a victim is gonna become knowledge that they've been a victim? And I wonder, maybe there's some way, I don't know what a year will do with us for us on that point, because, there's a limited number of operators and, they're good people by all accounts. And so, are we going to get I'm looking for my information. My information is, how long it takes typically for a victim to understand they've been victimized. And I don't know how to do that.
I don't know if there is a way. I think, if this goes through, even if the moratorium next year, that is what we get back from the report from DFR says everything has been fine. We haven't found any problems. The moratorium lifts, DFR is still in control. They're the ones that have to register these companies. They have to do a pretty good look at them, what's their record, should they be in Vermont or not? And so the control is there. And I think, we take a look at it next year and we may put some language in there. Just ask DFR to come back with it to us every year, just to let us know how things are going.
And I think I'd be comfortable, I think, if during the period of time before the moratorium, we're going to ask Aaron and his good folks to try to tackle that issue of how long it takes for victims to understanding that they might not get the data from, Vermont operators, but, maybe reach more broadly than that. Just so that we have some information.
Michael?
Could we add a stipulation in about location of these Bitcoin ATM machines? So that they're closer to the register and that there's an agreement with whoever is owning of the business to at least watch people that are doing this. But the concern that I have is that my guess is, and I haven't seen any of these here, is that they're in the back of the store where no one can see them. And,
You're pretty close.
I was gonna say, from my experience, actually ours is in the front of the window.
oh, okay.
I've got an ATM that's right by the
Oh,
door.
not the ATMs, not an ATM. I'm talking about like the crypto ATMs, not an ATM machine.
In my experience, from what I've seen, they're usually the ATM is next to the crypto
Yeah,
kiosk.
yeah, I don't think they want them hidden. They want people to, I mean, you're gonna advertise, they want people to use them, that's how they make their money, so.
And we don't want to get into telling Chair Marcotte where to put his merchandise in the store.
Might tell you other things. Colin, would you like to just weigh in on AARP's discussions with DFR? That would be helpful, to have you on the record as well.
Yeah. Happy to, absolutely. Colin Hilliard, I'm the advocacy director for AARP Vermont. Thanks for the opportunity to chat. Yeah, I think this bill does a really good job of protecting consumers and our members. One really critical provision here is that refund provision. 30-day new customer period with 90 days to act on that refund. That is from our model bill. And it would be one of the strongest in the country. I know some other states are looking at it. I believe if we passed it right now, it would be the strongest. So that's one of the best ways to protect consumers, right? And the other is the daily transaction limits. So we negotiated with DFR and CoinFlip. And I do think that what is in front of this committee is really strong protections. I know you all are considering more protections, and I think this is something that AARP is watching very closely. There's, I think, 20 of our state offices across the country are looking at regulations, and so I think this is something that is going to be evolving constantly, right? Because Vermont has done a good job of regulating this already, we haven't seen the explosion in reports of fraud that have been in other states, right? A 99% increase across the country year over year by the Internet Crime Report that I believe had been circulated. So I just really encourage this committee to, not consider this a one and done. Like all the fraud work that we do, it's constantly evolving. And so that, I think having the moratorium protection and DFR a chance to revisit with you, I think that's a really good idea. Happy to answer any other questions.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. When I came in this morning, I was having a real hard time wanting to move forward on this. And I think through the discussions that we've had with everybody, with BFR, CoinFlip, with AARP, and really looking at the language, seeing how strong this is, I think I'm more willing right now to give it a shot to see what things look like in a year from now. And then move forward from there, and have this discussion again next year. So I appreciate everyone's thoughts on this. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. And I kind of share that as well, but I think that good work has been done and I mean, I'm willing to pass this and see what happens.
Is there gonna be any language that talks about what we're looking for from DFR, in the interim before the moratorium ends?
I think they know what we're looking for. There's,
Taking notes behind.
yeah. Aaron was writing quite a bit. So sure that we will get a thorough report that we don't have to be so prescriptive on.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with that.
That's fair.
Michael?
So we're gonna be voting on this very shortly?
Yeah.
So I will be voting no.
You want to take them one at a time? I mean, we're voting on the amendments from the Senate. So we have two different amendments. We have banking amendment and
My,
then we don't need, I don't think it's just gonna be a struggle.
it's fine. It doesn't matter how, I don't support it without a ban.
Okay.
If you want to vote for the banking changes is the question.
It's not gonna be well, it'll be on this record, so. If you want to support the banking changes and
The mutual,
We can do it. in
that's
two
fine.
parts.
That's fine.
Call division.
Mike, if I can weigh in and explain my silence, yeah, you talked about this not being everybody's cup of tea. Early in my Forest Service career, I helped a colleague move to a new job. I helped him load his truck, and it took two of us stout guys to carry his chest of gold coins out to his truck. Not kidding. And here we are, 50 years later, 45 years later, in a totally different world. Now, I do have kids who are involved in cryptocurrency and all that. I would still probably just as soon bury my wealth in the backyard if I wasn't concerned about forgetting where I put the shovel to dig it up with. So all that being said, I think the changes I've seen here, the 30 days, the 90 days, the requirement for a picture and phone calls and some of those other things, that makes a pretty good belt of consumer protection. And I think the 1-year extension on the moratorium is the suspenders. So I do like this, despite my naivete overall and the overall concept. So there you go.
And I'll also just say, I have my reservations, but I'm willing to get this moving.
I still have reservations, but I'm going to see what comes back to us next year before we say, no, you can't be in Vermont, period. Okay, so we'll take them one at a time. So on the Senate proposal of amendment on the mutual, what is it? Financial institutions. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay. And then on the other piece of the continuing the moratorium, but also adding the protections of that have been hammered out by EFR and point flip and AARP as presented in the Senate proposal of amendment on the crypto kiosks. Raise your hand, all in favor, opposed. Okay, so so I think I would say that the overall, I mean, you can report that, I think. When you report, it'll probably be Thursday, it's ready to go. So the bill, assuming will move forward to the governor, and we'll see what happens next year. So, Aaron, thank you, and thank you to DFR for put a lot of work in this, I know. Same with you, Larry, and thank you for working with the Department of Financial Regulation, and thank you to AARP as well for helping to really put some really strong protections on. I think this will be something that the rest of the country will look at. Maybe we'll have some good protections for on the crypto side of the. So. With that, I think we're done for the day. Back here at 9 tomorrow. We'll start looking at 122. This 122, taking more testimony. We'll be getting a better idea, I think, from appropriations on what may be going into that bill or coming out of it. So we'll know more and more. Any questions?